The morning of the 2nd of August, 338 BC, must have been a restless one for thousands of Greek soldiers. The air in Boeotia, the land where the small town of Chaeronea was located, was thick with tension. Here, in these fields, which were usually used for grazing livestock or peaceful agricultural work, two powerful forces were about to clash. On one side was the Macedonian army, led by King Philip II, a man whose name already inspired fear and respect throughout the Hellenic world. On the other was the combined army of the Greek city-states, led by Athens and Thebes. This was not just another border skirmish. It was the culmination of decades of intrigue, diplomatic battles, and open conflict. For a long time, Philip II had been steadily and methodically building up the power of his kingdom. His goal was not simply to win a single battle, but to establish complete Macedonian hegemony over all of Greece. He envisioned a united Hellas under his rule, capable of resisting the Eastern powers. But to achieve this, he needed to break the pride and independence of the great city-states. Athens, with its developed democracy, rich culture, and powerful fleet, was a symbol of this independence. Thebes, once the hegemon of Boeotia, also had a strong army and a rebellious spirit. For them, this battle was not just a defense of their lands, but their last chance to defend their sovereignty, their right to live by their own laws without submitting to the will of a foreign king. The fields around Chaeronea became the arena for the decisive battle. Every warrior, from experienced strategists to young recruits, was aware of the significance of the events to come. For Philip II, it was a step towards the realization of his grand plans. For the Greeks, it was the last line of defense before the loss of what they valued most: their freedom. It was a clash between two worlds, the world of the old, proud city-states accustomed to autonomy, and the world of a new, centralized monarchy striving for unification and expansion of influence. When the armies met, a ringing silence hung over the field, broken only by the clang of armor and the commands of the commanders. But Philip II was not a man who relied solely on numerical superiority or a frontal attack. He was a master strategist and a subtle psychologist, able to read his opponent's intentions and use them against him. And on the fields of Chaeronea, he demonstrated his tactical genius in all its glory. The key element of the Macedonian victory, as became clear later, was a brilliant and, at first glance, completely unexpected maneuver. On his right flank, where the Athenians were positioned, Philip II ordered a deliberate, organized retreat. This was not a flight, not panic, but a carefully planned retreat. The warriors retreated while maintaining their formation, but creating the illusion of weakness, as if they could not withstand the onslaught and had faltered. Imagine this moment. Dust rises from the feet of the retreating Macedonians, their ranks seeming pliable. The strategist Harris, who commanded the Athenian forces, probably saw this as a chance for a quick and decisive victory. Perhaps he imagined how his name would go down in history as the savior of Hellas who defeated the Macedonian king. He ordered his troops to advance, pursuing the retreating enemy. The Athenians, encouraged by their apparent success, rushed forward. However, this was a trap carefully set by the Macedonian king. Philip's retreat was directed towards uneven terrain, where the phalanx formation, so valued by the Greeks, lost its effectiveness. Moreover, this pursuit caused the Athenian flank to stretch out, its ranks to scatter, and most importantly, it broke away from its Theban allies, creating a dangerous gap in the center of the Greek army. This gap was not just a physical space on the field. It was a psychological gap, a disruption of coordination, a loss of unity that was so important to a united army. One moment, the Greeks were a united force, and the next, they were two separate, isolated parts, each moving at its own pace, pursuing its own goal. It was at this moment, when the Athenian formation was disrupted and their flanks were vulnerable, that Philip II realized that his cunning had worked. He had created the ideal conditions for a counterattack that would prove decisive. But to understand the full extent of this superiority, we need to go back a little and look at how Philip II managed to create such a formidable military machine in the first place. His victory at Chaeronea was not a one-day fluke. It was the result of decades of painstaking work, military reforms, and strategic thinking. When Philip ascended the Macedonian throne, his kingdom was on the fringes of the Hellenic world, surrounded by more powerful neighbors. He inherited an army that, although brave, was inferior in organization and armament to the advanced Greek city-states. However, Philip was not just a king, he was a military genius. He completely rebuilt the Macedonian army, transforming it from a militia into a professional, well-trained, and well-equipped force. His main innovation was the famous Macedonian phalanx, armed with sarissas, long spears reaching 6 meters in length. This was a weapon never seen before, which gave the Macedonians a huge advantage. But Philip did not stop there. He developed the concept of combined arms, where the heavy phalanx acted as an anvil, holding back the enemy, while the cavalry of the heteroi, elite horsemen, often from the nobility, under the command of the king himself or his trusted generals, acted as the hammer, delivering a decisive blow to the enemy's flanks or rear. Add to this light infantry, javelin throwers, and archers who provided cover and support, and you have a well-rounded, flexible army capable of adapting to any situation on the battlefield. It was not just a crowd of warriors. It was a unified, well-oiled machine where each element knew its role and acted in strict accordance with orders. At the same time, despite their glorious military history, the Greek city-states continued to rely on the traditional model of a civilian militia. Their hoplites, heavily armed infantrymen with shields, short spears, and swords, were brave and fought well in close formation, but their training was less intensive and their command often suffered from political divisions. The united Greek army at Chaeronea had no single supreme commander capable of making quick decisions and coordinating the actions of different contingents. The Athenians and Thebans, although allies, had their own strategic priorities and tactics. Demosthenes, the great Athenian orator who fiercely called for resistance to Philip, managed to unite the Greeks, but was unable to overcome their internal differences and traditional attachment to outdated military methods. His impassioned speeches, full of patriotism and calls for freedom, inspired the citizens, but could not compensate for the military superiority of the Macedonian professional army. Now let us return to the battlefield. While Philip masterfully played out his cunning on the right flank, an equally dramatic scene was unfolding on the left. Where the Greek formation was strongest and most determined stood the sacred band of Thebes. This was a unique unit consisting of 300 carefully selected warriors who, according to Theban legend, were lovers. It was believed that warriors fighting alongside those they loved would fight with redoubled fury, refusing to allow shame or cowardice. They were a symbol of Theban military valor, undefeated in previous battles, and their reputation was awe-inspiring. They were opposed by the Macedonian left flank, led by none other than 18-year-old Prince Alexander, the future great. For the young Alexander, this was his first serious test as a commander. He was full of ambition, eager to prove himself and prove his worth to his father. He was tasked with breaking the most elite part of the Greek army, and he accomplished this task with remarkable cruelty and determination. Alexander, leading his cavalry of heteroi and elite infantry, did not simply attack the sacred band. He descended upon them with such force that the Thebans found themselves surrounded. These 300 warriors, accustomed to victory, faced an unprecedented onslaught with Macedonian cuirasses and cavalry attacks on all sides. They fought to the last. No one surrendered. No one retreated. According to Diodorus Siculus, all 300 warriors fell on the battlefield, fighting shoulder to shoulder. Their bodies were found lying where they stood, in tight formation, facing the enemy. This loss was not just military, it was a crushing blow to the Theban spirit, to their belief in their own invincibility. The famous Lion of Chaeronea was later erected on the site of their death, a majestic monument that was discovered by archaeologists and serves as a silent testimony to their heroic but hopeless struggle. While Alexander was crushing the Thebans, Philip II moved on to the next phase of his plan on the right flank. Seeing that the Athenians, carried away by the pursuit, had spread out and broken their formation, he gave the signal to counterattack. What appeared to be a retreat suddenly turned into a powerful onslaught. The Macedonian phalanx, having restored its formation in a more advantageous position, now descended upon the disorganized Athenians. It was a classic hammer and anvil tactic, with Philip's phalanx acting as the anvil, holding back the Athenians, while the cavalry, possibly transferred from other areas or specially trained for this maneuver, struck from the flank. The Athenians, caught off guard, were unable to regroup. Their formation fell apart and they fled. The battle, which began in the morning, was over in a few hours. The complete defeat of the Greek militia was undeniable. The Athenians, accustomed to victories at sea and on land, faced disaster. Diodorus Siculus reports that more than 1,000 Athenians fell on the battlefield, and another 2,000 were taken prisoner. The losses of the Thebans, especially after the destruction of the sacred band, were comparable. The Macedonian army, thanks to its superiority in tactics and weaponry, suffered significantly fewer losses. After the battle, when the field was littered with the bodies of the fallen, Philip II showed remarkable leniency, unusual for that time. He did not destroy Athens or sell all its inhabitants into slavery, as was often the case with defeated cities. The Athenian prisoners were released without ransom, and the bodies of the fallen were sent home for a dignified burial. This was not an act of pure mercy, but a calculated political move. Philip understood that he needed Greece not to be destroyed, but subjugated, so that it could serve as a base for his future eastern campaigns. He wanted the Greeks to join him as allies, not as sworn enemies. This softness became part of his plan to create the Corinthian League in 337 BC. It was an alliance of Greek city-states under the hegemony of Macedonia, which legally formalized Macedonian rule over all of Greece. Every polis, with the exception of Sparta, was forced to join this alliance, recognizing Philip as their hegemon and commander-in-chief. Theoretically, the city-states retained some autonomy, but in practice their foreign policy and military affairs were now controlled by Macedonia. This was the end of the era of independent Greek city-states, an era that had lasted for hundreds of years and had given the world democracy, philosophy, and art. For Athens, Chaeronea was not just a defeat, but a national disgrace. The city that prided itself on its freedom, its democracy, and its contribution to the victory over the Persians was now under the rule of a foreign king. It was not just a military defeat, it was a blow to the very heart of their identity. The Athenians, who for centuries had prided themselves on their autonomy, their ability to withstand any threat, be it Persian hordes or Spartan ambitions, were now forced to acknowledge the superiority of the Macedonian king. For a city that had given birth to democracy and considered itself a beacon of civilization, it was a profound humiliation. It was not just a defeat in a single battle, but the end of an entire era. The golden age of Greek freedom that the Athenians themselves had so cherished and celebrated. It was this sense of shame and powerlessness that pervaded Athens in the days after Chaeronea. A city accustomed to triumphs now mourned its fallen and captured. For many years, the orator Demosthenes, whose fiery speeches had so inspired the citizens to fight against Philip, tirelessly warned of the Macedonian threat, calling Philip a barbarian who encroached on Hellenic freedoms. He called for unity and resistance, but his words, though they ignited hearts, could not overcome either the internal disunity of the Greek city-states or the overwhelming military superiority of Macedonia. After Chaeronea, Demosthenes continued his political activities, but his influence was no longer what it had been, and his calls for struggle sounded more like an echo of a bygone era than a realistic plan of action.